A Gail series story, Millennial Gail. This is about the story about why Millennial Gail, which is future Gail, showed up on Church of Gail in 2021. This is a story written by me, Gail Schuler, and it's part of the Gail series. This is actually the latest story that I've written, but I just think it's an important one. And I do believe that Steven Spielberg and Brent Spiner, executive producers, are also making it into like a television show or movie. You can get it on 00 on cable. Millennial Gail. I never felt anyone would love the real me. I became very good at wearing different shoes depending on which group I wanted to emulate. Growing up, my mom said my legs were skinny without calves like my selfish, cold dad. I also had no personality and was boring like my dad. So in my teens, I watched the Lerner and Loewe musical Gigi, practically memorized it, and made an idol out of the charming main character full of bubbly life and personality. Later, I decided that I wasn't living in turn-of-the-century Paris and this wouldn't work in 1974. There were too many pot-smoking hippies with stringy, straggly hair, and I needed a role model that would work in 1974. Gross hippies. As far as the real me, I had no idea who she was and was scared to find out. Someone boring, ugly, and an utter moral failure. I loved to lose myself into the Rodgers and Hammerstein musicals, where it seemed that true love sang in the beautiful song sung from the depths of love, so different from the screams and nags of my narcissist, enraged Japanese bulldog of a mother who didn't impress me, despite her hot looks. I knew a man might be attracted to her body, but would run for his life once she opened her mouth. It's kind of embarrassing to admit how far I would go to be acceptable. Once, at around age 19, I had a bad crush on biology major Keith Morgan, who ended up becoming a doctor. If only I could snag such a man, someone intelligent, thoughtful, deep, and who seemed like he'd be a great catch for a husband. Not that I was desperate to get married, but depth and intelligence always made me feel at home, and Keith seemed my dream man. But I figured that my true self would scare off the guy, like I knew my mother scared off good men. I wanted to lose myself into a good man to feel good about myself. So I pretended to be a frail, helpless woman around Keith Morgan once, and acted like I was a feminine, helpless girl in need of masculine assistance, striving to draw out the masculinity in Keith and make him attracted to me. It was a little hard for me to put on a helpless air, but Fascinating Girl insisted that this act made the man feel masculine, which would draw out his masculine desire to protect a feminine, vulnerable girl in need of masculine protectiveness and would make him attracted to her. So I acted feminine and helpless, like I wasn't capable enough to drive home from a Campus Crusade for Christ meeting I attended in Kendall, Florida. I wanted him to rescue me as a helpless, beautiful girl and offer me a ride home. He looked at me strange and said, "You can't drive home?" I figured a truly feminine woman, the kind who could attract a masculine, forever in love with you guy, should not act too competent around a guy. Some crazy idea I got from reading Fascinating Girl by Helen Andelin, a book my feminine paternal grandma mailed to me about how to win a good man's eternal love. The book said, when you acted femininely coy and helpless, it brought forth the masculine instinct of protectiveness and made a masculine and good husband material guy attracted to you. The book was all about winning a forever love and looked upon sex before marriage as a sure way to lose a guy who would make a good husband. I was hunting for a good husband who'd give me a forever, eternal, beautiful love. I was aiming for a good husband who would love me forever. The book claimed that an ideal woman awakens a man's deepest love and tenderness, exactly what I wanted and needed. But nothing I did worked, so I backslid and did what the book said was the unforgivable sin to find a man attracted to you. I tried the direct approach. I actually proposed to Keith Morgan. My crush on him started about 1976 at Miami-Dade Community College. Then Keith transferred to Florida State University. He was a year ahead of me. I applied to Florida State University Nursing School and was accepted to their nursing school and started at Florida State University in the fall of 1977. So I proposed to Keith around spring 1978, after we both went to Florida State University. The book Fascinating Girl said this was the absolutely wrong thing to do because it was far too aggressive and turned off men who wanted a woman to be submissive to them. But I was desperately in need of a good husband who would love me forever and thought I had found him, and I couldn't even get him to ask me out for a date, and I learned it was hard for me to put on the helpless act, and apparently it wasn't very convincing. Even worse, I worshipped him too much to flirt with him in such a manipulative way, but the book said this was the only way to do it unless you wanted to scare him off. It was difficult for me to flirt with a guy to drum up his interest because for me, attraction always evolved out of a deep friendship first, and how could I be friends if I had to put on an act to win his interest? I had not dated Keith except as part of a double dating arrangement where I was Jeff's date and Keith was dating a Cuban girl as Keith and his date sat across from me and Jeff at the dinner table. Jeff was a nice guy but not my type, and I didn't go on any more dates with him. I had observed Keith on that double date and decided I would like to marry him. I have to admit, I also thought about marrying another guy I had dated, a Jewish guy named Mitch Abrams at the time, and this mortified me about myself because Mitch wasn't even a Christian. But I told myself that once I got married, I'd quit having the wandering eye. How sinful I was, I felt back then, thinking about marrying two guys at the same time, all in a year, one a Christian and one Jewish. I felt this made me a woman who could never win a man's forever love because I had a hard time making up my mind who I wanted to be committed to. This was the 1970s. Hey, but I was dating, and when you're dating, it's okay to date around to find the right one, right? Yeah, but to think I thought about marrying two guys within a year? I needed to work on myself. I had no idea back then why I was attracted to Mitch Abrams. He was Jewish, and even scoffed at my Christianity as too rigid. But it seemed I could be the real me with him, whoever that was. I went out on dates with him, but was determined to save myself as a virgin for my husband. But when Keith rejected me, I was mortified with myself. I never allowed myself to date a non-Christian again after Keith's rejection, until I married Christian David Schuler in 1985. I figured my loose morality played a role in Keith's rejection because Keith knew I had dated sinful Mitch Abrams, who smoked pot and had plenty of premarital sex. I assessed all that I felt I did wrong when Keith rejected me as a wife in 1978 and was determined to correct it, which meant only dating Christian guys and never proposing to a guy again. Keith knew that I had dated Mitch Abrams, and I figured that may have played a role in his rejection of me as a wife. Christians taught that Christians should only marry Christians, that to marry one who was not a Christian was a sin. It meant light mating with darkness. And to think I even thought about marrying pot-smoking Jewish Mitch Abrams. For shame! My feelings for both Keith and Mitch were strong, but different. In Keith, I felt I found someone who was my Christian ideal of a husband, intelligent, moral, deep, committed, and not bad-looking either. Keith was a biology major, obviously intelligent, but at the time didn't state he wanted to be a physician. With Mitch, I just felt like I could be real with him and loved for who I really was. And he was a musician who composed his own songs and also seemed to have a spiritual commitment and the courage to think for himself. He, too, said he wanted to be a doctor. He was not physically attractive, but had inner depths I found compelling. However, he had plenty of premarital sex, smoked pot, and did some things that Christianity would frown upon, and I couldn't understand why I felt so attracted to him and felt horribly sinful about it. I was a beautiful girl at age 19, so it was a piece of cake to get a guy to lust after me. Gross lust. How I hated lust. It meant I was a sinful whore, a cheap, tawdry girl, with none of the qualities that really mattered. I hated it when guys whistled at me from their cars as they drove by. No, no, no. I wanted a love that would last forever. Now that was an accomplishment worth striving for. In fact, it was life and death for me. Anyone could do lust, but not everyone could do a true love that lasts forever. In fact, cheap and tawdry whores and prostitutes did lust. Needless to say, when Keith Morgan said to me right after I proposed to him, "You're a pretty girl, but I only feel friendship for you. You need to be more extroverted, perhaps?" I cried for 3 days straight, feeling like an utter failure in terms of landing a good husband, and lost hope that I could get a good guy for marriage. I felt he was just being polite and didn't tell me the real reasons he rejected me, and figured my dating Mitch Abrams didn't help. I definitely needed to do better about remaking myself into that dream woman I told myself back then. After that rejection, I lowered my standards for my dream man and decided no such man existed, and that I had to settle for something more realistic. Unfortunately, I also decided that my true self would never be loved in its raw state, and that I still needed to remake myself into a better person. I really bought into the Christian concept that we are all born sinners and need to be redeemed to be acceptable. This meant crucifying my true self and rising above it and being better. After all, didn't Christianity teach that we had to die to self to be virtuous? I decided if I got a good Christian man, even if he wasn't a physician or a smart biology major, that should suffice. Ugh! After Keith's rejection, I felt my mother was right. I was a selfish, no-good girl. My dream man had rejected me for a wife, but admitted I was a pretty girl. So that meant I was only pretty, which meant nothing to me, since my mother was drop-dead gorgeous and did not impress me. Pretty girls were a dime a dozen when you were 19. I knew any man that actually lived with my mom would run for his life. I was striving valiantly to be the total opposite of her, kind of more like my paternal grandmother, who was sweet and submissive. So I lived with regrets about myself and the family that raised me, convinced I didn't have what really matters, the qualities that make for a good wife and that would give me a forever love. I felt like an utter failure, because being a good wife and married to a man who adored me at the time was all I cared about. My attitude was that it was my dream man or I'd just be single the rest of my life. Pretty girls were a dime a dozen to me. A dime a dozen! My mother was a pretty girl and did not impress me, period. All I had was my mother's good looks, and I was doomed to a life of marital failure like my parents. I cried for 3 days straight after Keith rejected my marriage proposal to him, but pulled myself together and told myself I would never propose to a guy again, and would strive even harder to be like the woman described in Helen Andelin's Fascinating Girl. It seemed my masculine aggressiveness to propose to Keith had shown him I was the opposite of all that Fascinating Girl said a woman needed to be to bring out a worthy man's eternal and unending love for her. His rejection meant I was not letting him lead in being an aggressive, rebellious woman, the worst sin to a man, according to Fascinating Girl, especially if you wanted him to love and adore you forever. After that, I avoided Keith Morgan like the plague, so horrified that I committed the unpardonable sin of aggressively and unattractively proposing to him. I didn't want him to feel I was chasing him or pursuing him, and decided to give him his space, feeling terrible that I probably made him very uncomfortable by proposing marriage to him and didn't want him to feel uncomfortable. My goal was to be a dream woman for my dream man, and boy, had I failed. As I dreamed about marrying Keith, I had dreams about being a domestic goddess, flowing about his house, while his eyes looked at me with adoration and love. But I was so far from this. I was horrified with myself. I only wanted to be a dream woman to a guy who was my dream man. That is, someone who was extremely intelligent, moral, godly, and manly. Manliness was needed, because those were the men who didn't abandon their wives for pretty stewardesses. They prided themselves on taking care of their woman. For that man, I'd crucify myself and bring him eternal happiness. Guys who only loved me for my body, like those dirtbags who whistled at me from the cars that drove by, I treated like the scum of the earth. They reminded me of my cold, selfish dad, as my mother called him, or even worse, because they gloated in their lust. Also, because I was so dedicated to my cause to be a dream woman for my dream man, I looked down as the scum of the earth any man who dared approach me for romance if he failed to meet my high standards and dared to ask me out for a date. Oh, but I had failed my own high standards. My dream man Keith's rejection was proof of it. I was such a rebellious, sinful woman. I needed a total remake. I concluded that Keith rejected me as a wife because I was still a moral failure and still needed to improve. This served to reinforce my prudishness, and I became more self-righteous and had a real need to prove I was not a lust machine. Because my mother had drummed into me over and over growing up, screaming at me, "You just like your father, cold, selfish. If not for me, you be on the streets. He left us for pretty stewardesses." As I did the remake on myself, assessing how I failed to be the dream woman described in Fascinating Girl, I started becoming more like her. I looked down as the scum of the earth anyone who failed to be like me or who didn't share my Victorian dreams. My sister was having premarital sex, smoking pot, and living the hippie lifestyle, and I was embarrassed to admit we were related. She was the opposite of the feminine, demure, and godly woman I needed to be to win that dream man's eternal love. My mother emphasized all my young life how important it was to have financial independence and to never be financially dependent on a man. But I found her materialistic attitude repugnant and strove to be the opposite. She didn't seem to have a romantic bone in her body and was all caught up in looks and appearances and status and riches. I noticed she never dated a poor man. To be the opposite of her, I loved extremely romantic songs from Rodgers and Hammerstein musicals like "Some Enchanted Evening" or "I Have Dreamed" from The King and I. These songs were proof that true love existed, and no way would I crucify my heart to be a cold terrorist nag like my mother. But how to get a man who could sing songs like this to me and mean it? It meant I had to be better than who I was. I had to overcome the family that raised me, rise above it, and be better than my mother and my dad. My Eastern Airlines pilot dad seemed as unromantic as my mother. According to my mother, he had zero personality, and I was just like him. He only feigned good manners, but was a cold iceberg on the inside. He was on his 4th marriage, and it seemed true love had eluded him. I was determined to break from the pack and find a love that would last forever. Of course, my mother had nothing good to say about her ex. I didn't want just sex. Any cheap whore or lust machine could do sex, but not anybody could do true love that lasted forever. To me, sex in a true love that lasted forever was the most awesome thing on the planet, and anything or anyone that cheapened or degraded it was worthy of the firing squad. I was quite the prude, and felt my Victorian view of sexuality should be everyone's standard. If anyone fell short of what I deemed the all-glorious sexual standard I held for myself, they were literally the scum of the earth. This didn't mean I was rude to the worldly crowd when I dealt with them. It just meant that I felt they were not as morally enlightened as I was, and that I needed to try and win them to Christ or be an example to them. To have this rare sex with a forever love relationship seemed to me to be a rare diamond that I was determined to claim. This required commitment, dedication, and an utter remake of myself. I was determined to transform myself into the dream woman for a dependable masculine man who would take care of me beautifully. My mother, who worked as a swimsuit model, did not impress me. She obviously could do the cheap style of sex as I saw it, but she could not do true love sex. Being hot did not impress me. My mother was hot, and she did not impress me. I had to be better than hot. I had to be womanly, virtuous, and an angel, someone who would attract a man capable of giving me a true love that would last a lifetime. I was so convinced that it was the inner beauty that counted that I horribly neglected fashion and didn't do much with my hair, makeup, or my clothes. The clothes I wore had to show me off as the Victorian standard, feminine and godly. But at the State University, all I could afford was stuff like blue jeans. When I went to a Bible college that required dresses, I wore church clothes that covered me to the neck and felt proud of being a proper Victorian woman. It wasn't my best look, and perhaps that is why I never could get anybody better than David Schuler, who'd turn out to be a pedophile, who lied to me and said he was a virgin when he married me. I was so impressed that he married me without even holding my hand, and of course he never kissed me or caressed me. What a virtuous guy! It seemed at Bible college in 1983, my transformation was complete. I became so good at this transformation into the Victorian dream woman that I literally believed this was who I was. And once, when I went up on the stage to act the part of Agnes Whitfield from Charles Dickens' David Copperfield, my professor said my performance was so good he gave me an A. He never gave anyone an A. I was so proud of keeping my virginity for my husband. I wanted a love that would last a lifetime, a man who would adore me for life. It seemed the impossible dream and would require great effort and commitment, and I had to rise above my mother and my airline captain dad, who dumped my mother and went after all the pretty stewardesses, and I had to rise above the utterly unromantic and sinful home I grew up in, where screams and nags were my daily fare. When I married David Schuler in 1985, I did so without even holding his hand or our bodies touching in any way. And the fact that he married me despite not getting any sex or anything near sex showed me he loved me for all the right reasons. I had married my dream Victorian man and could now lose myself into Victorian marriage heaven. In fact, he studied missions at Baptist Bible College in Springfield, Missouri, and the pastor of the church I attended extolled him. I vehemently defended David when we dated when I heard some of the parents at the Christian school I taught at accused him of sexually pursuing their kids. Outrageous! When I insisted on our first date that there would be no physical contacts in any form or the date was over, he said, "I really respect your standards, and there won't be any physical contact on this date." He then took me to a first-class restaurant, the 94th Air Squadron in Miami. a respectable Bible college graduate was treating me seriously, I had a chance at my Victorian dream marriage. I landed my dream man as a virgin, a rather rare accomplishment for someone who attended a sinful state university with its beer parties and hippies galore. In fact, I kinda apologized to my fellow Bible college classmates when I attended Baptist University of America, 1979 to 1983, that I had backslid and gone to a sinful state university. My church taught that attending a state college was a real threat to one's morality, and that truly dedicated Christians should probably go to a Christian college for their moral safety. It didn't matter now to me that Keith rejected me because I had risen above him. Now my morality exceeded his. The Baptist group I now hung out with and identified with felt all other liberal and worldly Christians were in the dark, and looked upon Southern Baptists as worldly and in love with the sinful world and full of deadly compromises. Keith was an even more liberal Methodist and now morally hopeless. The only virtuous Christians who were truly in line with Jesus were strict, Victorian, independent, fundamental Baptists who felt that if a woman wore pants, that meant she was a rebellious woman wearing the clothes of a man. Horrors! In fact, Bob Jones University of Greenville, South Carolina, was one of the Christian universities I admired and had almost attended. They did wear pants there for sporting events, and I decided wearing culottes or pants, but dresses most of the time would work for me. I was in my Victorian dreamland. That's why I never wore pants in my 20s once I started attending Baptist University of America. And boy, was I proud of that. We wore culottes for sporting events. I had arrived. Total opposite of my bathing suit model mother, who was Nag City, woman's liber in the house when you lived with her. I was now my Victorian ideal. I was Agnes Wickfield of David Copperfield. I admired my fellow female Bible college classmates who extolled my feminine virtues, knowing they would land in their dream marriages with their dream man, and strove to emulate them and be like them. The beautiful soft glow on their inner beauty faces, the way their limbs graced softness and submissiveness to their husband as they moved about, was the be-all and end-all of my existence. I wanted to be just like them, a man's dream woman, to have a forever dream love. I was separated from the sinful world and gave up television and movies with glee. Hollywood in my Baptist group was called the Hollywood cesspool. No Victorian beauties there, so I dropped any idea of association with Hollywood in any way, like cold turkey. I was lost in my Victorian dreamland and only lived to be a dream wife to my Victorian husband. Separation from the sinful world meant I only reached out or befriended those in the sinful world to win them to Christ. And if their response was negative, I basically had nothing to do with them, lest their sins rub off on me and corrupt me. A born-again Christian showed their virtue by diligent church attendance and losing their worldly immorality. If you missed church when the doors were open and you weren't sick, you were backslidden and out of fellowship with Christ. Christians needed to attend church to remain separated from the world in their hearts, because our daily interactions with the world corrupted us, and so we needed to hang out with fellow Christians to help us stay on our path. Of course, we gave new converts time to acclimate to true and righteous Christianity and morality, knowing a babe in Christ was still stained by their former worldly connections, and encourage them to cut it off with any worldly connections that still stain them. So this was me from about age 19 to age 30. Marriage to my Victorian husband, David Schuler, really changed me. David was more concerned about appearances than with being a good husband to me, so I died inside while in that marriage. I had no idea he was a pedophile who only married me for show, so that he could be a pedophile without consequences. I told myself I was happy, and that if I was unhappy, it was because I was a moral failure and still needed to improve. But the emptiness in the marriage got to me, and I snuck off a letter to sinful Hollywood. Some star who really impressed me when I saw Brent Spiner play Data in Star Trek The Next Generation's Pen Pals. Brent as Data seemed like such a big, tolerant person, the total opposite of my boa constrictor husband. In this episode, the Data character was bucking the status quo, violating the rules to follow his heart, breaking the religious rules of his time, the prime directive, more concerned about being good than appearing good. The total opposite of my appearances-obsessed husband. I shared my Victorian heart with Brent Spiner in the letters I wrote to him, and Brent adored my dreams and who I longed to be. He also sensed my husband was constricting me. In short, Brent fell in love with me. I never expected it, and only wanted a pen friendship with him. A mystery caller called me and whispered with longings, "I want to rape you," in May 1991 to me on the phone. I hung up on him. I knew it had to be someone from Paramount Studios, because I had a pen friendship with both Richard Arnold and I guess Brent at that time, even though Brent didn't answer my letters except for a form letter. But my friend Melody Rondeau mailed me Brent's music album "Oh Yellow Eyes Is Back" in June 1991, and then I was head over heels in love with the Star Trek star Brent Spiner as a married woman. My mystery phone caller rapist was Brent, and he made that album for me, I could tell. But boy, did I feel sinful. And yet, I felt like I was in the heavens, and how could that be sinful? I was in a moral quagmire, and decided I needed to create a new morality for myself that seemed more in tune with true and authentic morality, and I still wasn't sure what that was. But it certainly couldn't be my husband, who was one thing at church and mean as the devil at home. It seemed the only sin to my husband was for me to say or do things that made David look bad to church people. Every time the church doors were open, I was expected to be there, rain or shine. Before marriage, I prided myself on this, but after marriage, it got old and seemed a shallow way to determine morality or spirituality. Heck, was church attendance alone the barometer for morality? What if the guy was one thing at church and another at home? I was also mad at Jesus in 1991 that I was stuck married to David Schuler, who kissed me like I was a robot, when Brent wanted to bed me and I had to turn Brent down so Jesus wouldn't kill me. That's because I had prayed almost every day in my 20s that I would only marry in God's will, and asked Jesus to break up any relationship that was not his will for me. Jesus made me feel good about myself at age 14 when I accepted him as my savior, and I didn't want to risk his scorn, so I refused Brent for sex in spring 1991. Kind of like how I turned down a chance to be an Air Force officer in 1979 to go to Bible college. When I feel God has told me to do something, I would almost literally go to hell for God. But I kept Brent in my dreams in the 1990s and studied him and tried to be his dream woman. By the time I divorced David in 2001, I had become a different woman who had shed her Victorian ideals and now strove to be a woman that I thought Brent would adore. I decided my former Victorian stance was too rigid and now donned the stance of a loving, accepting friendship type of relationship with my man, where we felt comfortable with each other and there was no pretense, which was basically how my relationship with Brent started. Sex and talk about sex was more free and easy, and the only bad sex was harmful sex that forced us to be someone we were not, or that violated true love in our hearts. The new sin was anything that opposed true love, or that forced one into a relationship they didn't want or need. But after my divorce, I didn't have any real sex with any guy, that is, until I had sex with Jesus and then Brent in 2022. I never had real sex outside of brain to brain with anyone outside of my ex David, though. So from the time of my divorce in 2001 to 2022, I had no real sex with any man. It was all brain to brain. Now that I had relaxed into a new persona after my divorce in 2001, I was amazed to discover over the next decade that all the hot men in Hollywood and in the world wanted me. But I was having trouble getting financial security in marriage at the time because an evil organization called the Jesuit Order opposed all the celebrity men who adored me. Brent couldn't marry me right away after I courageously divorced David in spring 2001, and I had no job when I divorced, because when I was married, I had wanted to be an ideal Victorian stay-at-home wife and mother and didn't have a job at the time of the divorce. Now single and back on the market, I noticed that other hot and famous men wanted me. What a mind-boggler! It was fun exploring my new hotness and my ability to drum up a band of dream men who adored me, something I would have deemed impossible in my 20s or earlier. And all just by being myself, so I thought. I would have married Brent if he showed up, but he never did. I, however, decided I would never settle for any relationship where I couldn't be real with the man like I'd been with Brent. To my amazement, the men seemed to love the real me. I still wasn't sure who the real me was, and used their attraction for me to find out. Once I realized I could get my dream man by just being myself, I made up my mind I would never settle for anything less, even if I never married again. The divorce with David was very nasty and expensive. Marriage to the wrong man was worse than being single, I concluded. David had been a boa constrictor to me during the marriage. Vladimir Putin introduced me to brain-to-brain sex in 2003, and this seemed a great way to find myself. From the time of September 11, 2001 to about 2006, I scuttled Brent out of my romantic dreams to be morally proper and took up Vladimir Putin. I figured I'd have a better chance with the president. However, I kept Brent as a friend. How could I forget Brent? He literally transformed me and gave me the courage to be me. Besides, I was impressed with the depth of his love for me when I learned he only had terrorist Laurie McBride to keep me alive. Brent seemed consumed with my safety and seemed thrilled that a man like Vladimir could possibly keep me safe. Safety was my obsession after my divorce. I was fighting to stay off the streets and needed to just survive. But at least as I was in this fight for my life, I had a band of super hot, powerful men who adored me and helped me stay positive. I encouraged Vladimir brain to brain to get a good wife for Brent and believed that Vladimir had done so. I guess I could have remarried a regular guy after my divorce, but after experiencing Brent, no regular guy would suffice. I would just love someone like Brent in my dreams my whole life and live blissfully in dreamland rather than risk another marriage to another like David Schuler. But by 2006, Vladimir had not married me, and I decided I wanted Brent back. At least Brent had the guts to talk to me on the phone. I decided Brent was the more masculine one, and I reinstated him. Brent seemed elated. I figured if he did get married when I let him go in 2001 to be with Vladimir, that the marriage was only for show and it wasn't his true heart. That was a safe guess. I had no problem with a show marriage on his part, as long as it was all consensual and we all understood that the sex we were having was something we all agreed to and enjoyed. Brent seemed proud of having a Maine woman who was sexiest woman alive and that all the Hollywood hotties wanted. I mainly kept them for insurance because I still hadn't married yet and needed eligible dream men for backups. Of course, we all opposed the horrible rapists and cruel ogres, the Jesuit Order, and Brent understood we needed a band of powerful men to defeat them so we could be lovers in peace. I learned about my powerful Catherine the Great and King David genes and began to feel comfortable in my role as the haughty woman who had brain-to-brain sex with them all. It was my way of rewarding them for their sacrifice and their courage, and thus, by having this group of men would ensure our survival and the ultimate defeat of the despicable Jesuits who threatened our very lives. Though the brain-to-brain sex with them was usually fun for me, I had the deepest and truest connection with my Brent, and he got about 90% of the brain-to-brain loving. It seemed Brent and I shared many of the same values and goals, and so I felt most connected and sexually interested in him. Now that I knew my true self could attract my dream men, in fact many dream men, I began to lose my need for sex, even brain-to-brain sex, which I think I used mainly as a way to find myself as a sexual person and to reward my men who literally risked their lives for me. On a humorous note, one of the men on the marriage list was the very Keith Morgan who had rejected me when I proposed to him at age 19. And I can't even recall if I ever had any brain-to-brain loving with him either while he was on the marriage list. I don't think I did. Keith Morgan was now a practicing ophthalmologist. I guess my more relaxed and true-to-myself version had decided in my 50s that his being a Methodist didn't make him a liberal, worldly Christian anymore, LOL. 50s Gail had discarded her strict Victorian performance from her 20s as a strict and theologically correct Bob Jones University-style Baptist to land her dream husband because she didn't need it anymore. But then, Bob Jones was founded by Methodist Bob Jones, who lived in Victorian America in the 1800s. But of course, that was when the Methodists were strict and proper in my eyes, so the old-time Methodists were okay to me as a young lady. But I was learning in 2011, when Keith was on the marriage list, that it never pays to put on a performance to be acceptable. Perhaps it was my performance at age 19 that Keith noticed and found confusing. But let's stop the digressions and get back on point. By the way, I found that just being myself in all my glories and forbidden dreams had now landed me my dream man, who I consider to be Brent Spiner. I always call Brent my dream man. My only problem was that Brent was somewhat famous, and a very powerful group called the Jesuit Order opposed his love for me. I felt that their opposition and threats on my life and the life of my friends also justified the marriage list for me. We needed a band of powerful men to defeat them. I gave the men on the marriage list brain-to-brain sex to reward them for their service like a duty, not realizing the effect it had on my Brent. If I didn't give them sex, I feared they might leave, and we needed them to defeat the Jesuits so that Brent and I could marry someday. Sometimes the brain-to-brain sex with them was fun, but other times I did the sex out of duty, feeling I owed it to them for the sacrifices they made for loving me. However, in most of the brain-to-brain group sex I had with the men, Brent was the one I thought about most of the time to get an orgasm. I also didn't consider brain-to-brain sex as full sex and thought the men understood that I only planned to have real sex with the one man I would physically marry. To me, the brain-to-brain sex was just some fun masturbation, not hurting anyone, and helping to meet the needs of my devoted and hot men friends, who literally risked their lives for me. Heck, even in my Victorian 20s when I was single, I would masturbate sometimes when I got a crush on a guy. My sex drive was stronger then. To me, masturbation was a harmless and a safe way to deal with the sex drive. My need to masturbate as a young lady would come and go, depending on if there was a guy in my life that I found attractive. As picky as I was my entire life, sometimes I'd go for months without a need to masturbate. If the guy was sexually attractive to me, it meant I was thinking of marriage to him. So the masturbation was morally fine, I told myself, even when I was very Victorian. So almost always, my masturbation dreams was only one man at a time. Group sex has never been my thing, but in the brain-to-brain, group sex is less intrusive. It's like one big mind and emotion connection with some fun masturbation to boot, and can be fun, and then I can choose who I want to emotionally connect with to make it so I can get into it. because sometimes I'm not in the mood for sex and have to drum it up to get into it. This one-on-one trend continued for the most part even when I started the brain-to-brain. I even let the men know in our brain-to-brain group sex sessions that I was mainly doing it with Brent in my mind. No connection, no attraction for me. Pure lust has never been a turn-on for me. As I evolved into the haughty woman, I became more relaxed about sex. But as for my own preferences, I felt that pure, unadulterated lust was as boring as hell. I knew others, especially men, found it exciting, and I pretended I felt the same way to make them feel accepted or respected if they were my friends. I even did this with Jesus. I like a multifaceted sexual experience, where I shared my depths with the man and felt the consummation between Ralph and Meggie in the Thornbirds when they came together for the first time was pretty exciting. In fact, in the 1990s, I studied that literary passage of the first time sex between Ralph and Meggie over and over to try and replicate it somewhat in the novel Silver Skies, to let the world know how Brent affected me. I watched that love scene in the Thornbirds over and over, 1993 to 1996, on my video cassette player, then would run to my bedroom to work on my novel Silver Skies. I felt the love between Brent and I deserved a literary masterpiece. I felt the love between us was so high and awesome it deserved that. In fact, I viewed our love as so awesome that it would never be threatened or destroyed, even if we allowed other men to also partake in it. Our relationship seemed established on total openness and honesty, and Brent was so very accepting of all of me and seemed so very secure that I felt I could be myself totally unrestrained, and he always seemed to adore me, however I was, and seemed to encourage me to be boldly myself. For this reason, and because he epitomized all I felt a man should be and cared about just about all the same things I did, he was and is my dream man. I was willing to let Brent have other women if he wanted, but Brent didn't seem interested in other women after he had me, and I figured he was just being true to himself and his true feelings, which I wanted for him to do. That a guy this awesome loved me made me feel so whole and complete, so healed, like he lit up an inner light flickering and dying out, and caused it to glow, so that all of me was an effusion of serenity, peace, and joyful translucence. He raised my inner soul to the heights, and for a man like this I'd give my life for. In my entire life, no man holds a candle to Brent for this reason. That I have him now, and that he seems to feel the same about me, makes me so thankful. For this reason, I don't want to betray Jesus, because Jesus gave him to me. Our relationship seems based on total and bold authenticity. Though I experimented with other men brain to brain, I let my men know that when it came time for real marriage, I only wanted one man. I didn't consider brain to brain real sex, but just glorious masturbation sessions that had real deep and cool emotional connections. I mean, my brain was connecting with their brain, and we could read each other's thoughts and emotions, so to me, in some ways, that was way cooler than just mere physical sex. I actually prefer the connections over the actual sex. So this brain-to-brain group sex was cool with me because it was more about the connections than the actual physical sex, which wasn't really taking place, to me, not in the brain-to-brain. If not for brain-to-brain, I doubt I would have had any group sex orgies at all, because actual physical group sex orgies are really not my thing. Not enough emotional connection to be exciting. And the thought of too much physicality and liquids all over the place does nothing for me, unless the liquids are coming as a result of a super deep and awesome emotional, spiritual, and in every way connection. And because I got my deepest connections with Brent, he got about 90% of the brain-to-brain loving. But in February 2021, I had a quarrel with one of the men on my marriage list, ex-Antichrist Zach Knight. I was rambling on and on about my speculations about a possible romance brewing between Rule 13 and Hitler, and thought Zach knew it was speculation and not me stating fact. Zach became so territorial that he concocted a plan to teach Hitler not to mess with his woman. We had just prevented Vice President Tulsi Gabbard from ousting me as president using the 25th Amendment, and Brent had taken Tulsi out using Hitler's Tyrannosaurus Rex. And now Zach injured Hitler and almost killed him, all because he misunderstood my speculation, thinking I was stating fact. I was so upset that he hurt one of our top military leaders, all because he thought Hitler was having sex with 13 because he misunderstood me. In the midst of our heated argument, I almost lightning bolted him when he accused Brent of being a cuck. I thought Zach was becoming the evil Antichrist again. Fortunately, Jesus protected Zach, and Zach was not harmed by my bolts. Jesus told us all to chill, but Brent said my communication with Zach was not that clear and that I needed to apologize to Zach, which I did. Hitler was very gracious, though he nearly lost his life because of Zach's territoriality over 13, and said if he was Zach, he would have done worse. But our disagreement started taking some interesting turns. You need to own the marriage list, Zach said to me. You always make your men look like assholes when you try to act pure and tell people the marriage list is their idea. At least be honest that you just like sexual attention from a lot of high-profile men. Zach was defensive because I told him what he did to Hitler was morally wrong and that it was Zach's fault for misunderstanding me, that he should have gotten his facts straight before injuring Hitler. So Zach went on the attack against my moral hypocrisy. I'm not going to own it because it's not true. I had told my men over and over that I didn't need a marriage list, that it was their idea. I thought they understood me. Then the subject got onto Brent, who I said was a better man than Zach and would never go kill a guy just for having some consensual sex with his wife. I never have fights with Brent. He's more of a grown-up than you. He's willing to listen and set his ego aside. Maybe Brent can be a pussy sometimes then. That did it. I thought he was becoming the Antichrist. I had sent all my men into psychiatric therapy because I felt they all suffered from PTSD after Laurie McBride's Cumstar killed millions on Church of Gail in our Cumstar battle. I will die to defend Brent's honor. I think you are forcing Brent to stay in therapy and won't let him leave to join this discussion. I'm thinking of lightning bolting you if you don't let him join right now. I give you 30 minutes to have Brent join this discussion before I send the bolts. In the meanwhile, Jesus, defend us. I really don't want to bolt you, Zach. I can't tell you how disappointed I am in you right now. Prove to me that the greatness I sensed in you still exists. Jesus told us all to chill, and he'd have a talk with us later. But we managed to resolve it ourselves. Jesus also protected Zach from my lightning bolts. Zach and I usually get along great, but we had a misunderstanding, and it led to this. I was really upset that he almost killed Hitler. After Zach and I made up, he decided to shoot straight with me and tell me what he really thought about me as a sexual person. And honestly, you want committed relationships, but you're not monogamous, Zach told me. You definitely get bored with the same guy all the time. You are too much woman for one penis, and I think that's okay. I was shocked he saw me this way, and that Brent also saw me this way. I'm really bothered that I have hurt Brent by having such wide sexual interests. I'm seriously considering eliminating the marriage list now. But Brent is a cuck in the true definition of it, Zach said to me. I wouldn't repeat this stuff to even Brent. I know you really want to fuck Jesus. I get it. You are attracted to power and perfection. You enjoy conquest. We share a lot in common that way. And Jesus is the ultimate power fuck for you. I was shocked that my men saw me this way. It certainly was not how I saw myself. I also was not dreaming about making love to Jesus, except as part of his church bride in some sort of higher dimensional, super hot, spiritual style connection and loving. I imagined Jesus' penis spreading out like an aurora borealis and entering everyone's heart with love and awesome peace, and we orgasmed with unutterable bliss and joy in our hearts, and perhaps the sky lit up with more light and glowed. I saw his orgasm as an orgasm of joy, peace, and beautiful translucence in our hearts, kind of like what I had with Brent, but better. After all, his bride was the church. How else did a deity make love to millions of humans? You gotta remember, I'm all into connection. However, Zach, as evil Antichrist, did successfully seduce me, impersonating Jesus in 2011 in the brain-to-brain servers, so I understood why he felt I had this deep, forbidden desire to fuck Jesus. What's funny about this is that I recall that even then, when I was making brain-to-brain loving to who I thought was Jesus, it was more out of obligation than need or desire. And I even started getting wore out because Zach, as Jesus, was too demanding and didn't give me my space. I tried to clarify myself with Zach. The marriage list was never my idea, actually. I just thought my chances with Brent were hopeless, and I went to Vladimir because I felt I needed a president in my life, and then it kind of started from there. I brought up to Brent what Zach said. I didn't appreciate him calling you a cuck and not having manliness either. Well, I can understand why he thinks that way, Brent replied. It does hurt sometimes that you have sex with so many guys. I just know you have insatiable needs for other men, and I'm always too afraid to say anything because I'm afraid you might execute me or something. Brent, do you want to cancel the marriage list? Only if you say so. I would rather be a monogamous couple like a real husband and wife. It would mean not having brain-to-brain with anyone else anymore. I thought about what Brent said, but encouraged Brent to be totally open and honest with me about his feelings. I didn't like getting these delayed bombs from my dream man. Oh my God! I thought he adored all of me totally unadorned. I had no idea I was doing some things he seemed to disapprove of. I'm undecided on whether I want to continue to have a marriage list. I was thinking maybe I could limit it to just about 7, but I don't want you to feel upstaged. And I only want sex with you if I really marry someone. It hurts my feelings, but I have to accept your decision. Then I just want you then. But what will happen to the men on the list? Will they be okay? Well, yeah. I just thought you had insatiable sexual needs and would get bored and feel trapped with only me. Oh dear. I had no idea you felt like that. How could you love me if you felt I was that way? I've done a lot of thinking about it, and I guess it's a mix of things. When we met, you presented yourself as having very tight sexual standards, to the point where you didn't even hold hands with your ex before marriage. And you told me how you dreamed of being a perfect, loyal housewife. So I thought that's what I was getting, is someone who would be extremely faithful and monogamous. Brent pondered over his words. I think it comes down to the fact that I secretly have very low self-esteem and don't feel good enough for someone to be only committed to me, and I always put your needs before mine. I think I want it to be just between you and me then. Sure, but I've been dealing with the fact that you've needed other men when you weren't satisfied by me. Realistically, you did that to your ex, David, too. You weren't satisfied with him anymore, and technically cheated on him emotionally with me. So I can't complain that you do the same thing when you're with me. I was sort of a homewrecker to begin with. And I felt pretty guilty about it too, I replied. But yet I felt like I was in the heavens with you. That is, until I found out about Laurie. Would you have gone to bed with me back then if I had said yes? I mean, before Laurie came into the picture? Well, yeah. It was wrong for us to do that, but we did it anyway. To cheat with each other emotionally, I mean. It already crossed the line there, so having physical sex wouldn't have been much worse. Yeah, I felt like such an adulteress back then. But I was so crazy about you. Gail reflected. I'm still crazy about you. I remember praying to Jesus and asking him to make it moral somehow, because I felt like we had a love from the heavens, and he seemed to tell me he would. I want you to be happy, Brent. I think I just want you on the marriage list. I don't like the idea of a ton of men googling over me on our wedding night. Up till now, the brain-to-brain seemed like another existence. But when I thought of real marriage, I basically thought of it with you. It sounds like you're punishing yourself for starting off the relationship with adultery as you see it. I sensed that you sensed that I was in a restrictive marriage, though. It was still wrong. I won't make any excuses for the mistakes I made. I know I'm not perfect. If you have sexual needs for other men, and romantic needs too sometimes, you should satisfy yourself. I've been accepting of it so far. We can even just keep it an open relationship until we get married. An open relationship until we get married? What does that mean? An open relationship means it's okay to have sex with other people. No! I want you alone right now. It seems marriage is really close, and now that it's close, I don't feel comfortable with a polygamous relationship for real. It's just that it never seemed like it would really happen, so I played the polygamy game. If it isn't, though, I want you to get your needs met. In fact, I'd be encouraging of it if you wanted to date normal guys from around where you live. There aren't any guys in my area that interest me. You are my dream man. I'd rather be single the rest of my life than ever settle for anything less than my dream man. I don't want a repeat of what happened to me with David when I was stuck in marriage to a man who failed to meet so many of my needs. I played to Brent the song Waitin' for My Dearie from the Lerner and Loewe musical Brigadoon. That was my theme song as a young lady. Part of the reason I married David is 'cause I married a man who was like my mother to get the approval I never got from her. It didn't work. Zach and I had weighed in on the conversation I was having with Brent. I personally think you like having the marriage list. I think it's always been your thing, Zach said to me. Brent admitted to me that sometimes he's uncomfortable about the marriage list. If you really don't like it, you should change it. I really don't have much say in the marriage list. My men seem to pick the men. Honestly, I think you should at the very least change that, Zach said to me. You should own it, and you should pick the men, and none of them should be out of obligation or pity. I think I'll have 7 men on my marriage list, but I only want to have actual sex with Brent when an actual marriage happens. I don't consider brain-to-brain as sex. And if they don't like the arrangement, they are free to leave and marry someone else, and there will be no hard feelings. Then it will be just me and Brent. I'd retain probably the ones who really had to suffer for being on my marriage list. Brent said if I lower the list, the ones not on the list will be taken off the brain-to-brain. I jumped over to Brent and continued my conversation with him. Well, I know I definitely can't meet all of your needs, especially not all the time, Brent said to me. If you have many guys, you wouldn't have to worry about that. But it's not fair to you for me to have other guys. I mean, if I'm allowed to have other guys, then you should be allowed to have other women. I mean, now that marriage is really getting so close, I'm talking real stuff now. Would I be allowed? I guess I could consider some women. Is that what you want? Whatever your decision is, it makes sense that it should be a two-way street. I actually gave you that permission to have another woman when I left you for Vladimir, remember? How did that work out? I actually didn't date anyone else around that time. Oh, I thought you did, I said to Brent. In fact, I thought you even married another woman. If you have side bitches and I have side bitches, then it makes the relationship equal as long as we mutually agree on it as a couple, Brent said. I made up my mind. You know what? Why don't we start off as monogamous and see how it goes? And we'll be honest if we have desires for another person and be upfront with each other and have an honest discussion about it. If I had known I was hurting you and that you thought I'd execute you 'cause of it, I'd stop it all. I even fake excitement with the men to satisfy them. I try to meet their needs 'cause they've suffered so much for being on my marriage list. The one I feel the safest with, that I feel accepts me unconditionally, is you, and I treasure that. You don't have to feel like you owe anyone anything for helping you, Brent said. Appreciation is a good gift in return. My mind was made up. In that case, I really desire to be monogamous with you. Please don't think I've ever found you boring. I find you gloriously comfortable." On February 11, 2021, I sent an email to my men. Dear men, Jesus has me in his crucible again. He's been removing clutter in my life, and now it's time to remove clutter from my marriage list. Zach and Brent both believe that the reason I have a marriage list is because I have this huge sexual appetite that requires many men. That isn't true. I've been up crying all night, feeling like I failed the man I truly love and really want to marry, my Brent. This is hard to admit, but the reason I have the marriage list is because I feel insecure about keeping a man in love with me. I'm afraid of losing my men, that when they get to know me, they will leave. I can guarantee you with my last encounter with Zach Knight that I have no confidence that Zach is one who would stay, and he definitely needs to be off the list. I'm not even confident I can keep his friendship, let alone any true love. But then he has Rule 13, thank God for him. But never fear, I'm taking them all off except Brent. I've been faking sexual desire to please the man, to ensure I keep them, and I can be a pretty good fake. Sometimes I'm not in the mood for sex. I just want friendship. But I'm scared that if I come across as anything other than this sexual firebomb, that I will lose the man. Jesus has shown me that it is my insecurity about losing a man and never being able to keep them that has made me have the marriage list and that causes me to appear to have insatiable sexual desires. It's time to remove the clutter. The marriage list is now only one man, the man I truly want to marry and live with, Brent Spiner. I would like to remain friends with the rest and encourage you to find the woman of your dreams. Sadly, my insecurities have made Brent feel insecure so that he, like me, feels that he will lose me if he doesn't allow me to have this huge marriage list and doesn't cater to what he perceives as my insatiable sexual desires. No, Brent, it's not what you think. It's my insecurity about keeping a man that is the reason for the marriage list. Brent and Zach have bought into my performance as this sexual firebomb, when I'm really just a humble girl who wants a simple life and wants to be loved and accepted for who I am and feel most comfortable and at home with Brent. I don't even want to be U.S. president, but I care too much about the world to stop this job. The duties of this job often make me feel like such a hypocrite. Being a politician requires a lot of hypocrisy, and I hate it. So there you have it. I'm just an insecure little girl, afraid I'll lose the man, and that's the real reason for the marriage list. Some days I'm not even thinking about sex. Some days I just want to be with someone I can be at home with, and that person is Brent Spiner. Now I'll try to sleep, but I can't stop crying, because my insecurities have caused the man I truly love and want to marry, Brent Spiner, to feel insecure, because he thinks I will get tired of him and leave for greener pastures, which are the exact same fears I have about men and is the true reason for the marriage list. Well, the clutter must go. It's only Brent on the list now. I will be brave and face my fears and quit putting on the sexual firebomb performance to please people. I'll try to sleep. But I'm crying too much because my insecurities have made the man I'd die for feel insecure, and he thinks I would execute him if he dared look at another woman while I gallivant around with a marriage list. Love, Gail. I decided to cancel the marriage list in February 2021, but felt the men that I now called Gail's men still needed a way to release their sexual feelings for me in a meaningful way. One man, Edward Prendergast, left the marriage list and found happiness with another woman, and I was thrilled for him. Brent and I had more conversations. The first year of marriage, David tried to force me to sleep in the same bed with him, even though I was having trouble sleeping in a bed with another person, and got furious at me if I wouldn't do so. I guess because it made it appear like we weren't a couple. He didn't care at all if I got my sleep or not. Finally, he agreed to an arrangement where we could put two beds together and I got better sleep. I'm a light sleeper. It took about 8 months before he could be happy with me not in the same bed with him. I suffered a lot of insomnia, I elaborated. Then he forced me to go to a church where the pastor used salesmanship techniques to guilt church members into visitation and put numbers up on the overhead projector to see which Sunday school classes had the highest attendance. I told David I felt uncomfortable at that church and wanted to go somewhere else. He then accused me of being a rebellious wife, not in submission to her husband, and the pastor started preaching messages about rebellious wives and kept looking at me the whole time. That church offered to send us out as missionaries because we were both Bible college grads, but I told David he was a hypocrite because that church was not King James Bible only, and I thought he cared about that. And I talked him into, after a year of forcing me to attend that church, letting me go to another church. I can tell you, I learned some valuable lessons from that marriage, though. For sure, Brent said. I'm so sorry you had to deal with that. It's no wonder I started writing the satanic and forbidden New Age TV show Star for comfort. I was getting sick of Christianity for show. David was one thing at home and another at church. It was like he was Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. Definitely, Brent agreed. There's also definitely toxic Christianity out there. It should never be used to force limits on people's happiness or freedom. That's not what love or spiritual growth is about. Making love to him was like making love to a robot, I said to Brent. No feelings in his moves whatsoever. I've noticed evil Jesuits make love like that often. I totally get that, Brent said. Like he was just masturbating with your body. The first year sex was pretty good, I said, because I never had sex before and I probably didn't know what I was missing. But when I heard your voice with longings on the phone in 1991, I realized what I was missing. I think I got wet panties just hearing your voice. You have a sexy voice. Thank you. Yeah, it's different when it's with someone you love and who loves you back. Believe me, you were absolutely exciting when you called in the 1990s. I thought you were the sexiest man alive. The combination of depth, deep longings, tenderness, sensuality. I heard your voice and I was a goner for the rest of the day. Back then, the Jesuits weren't using brain control on me like now. I explained to Brent that I felt Jesuit brain control sometimes blocked my orgasms with him, but later I would feel that it may have also been a bit of asexuality in myself. I can get really turned on thinking about sex or connection with a man, but when the actual sex happens, I prefer penis cuddling and connection to quickie orgasms. I mean, my husband never talked to me with such feeling like you did. He would just bark orders at me all day and pinch my butt and say I was getting fat on him. I wasn't fat either. That was about the extent of his sexiness. No, you weren't fat at all. You showed me pictures of you. He was just being mean. For me to turn you down required a will of steel. I was afraid if I went to you, Jesus would punish me severely. I was a big churchgoer back then. You know, I don't think it was wrong at all. I think the only wrong thing was feeling like you were trapped with David for any reason. The fact that you didn't leave him for me at the time definitely showed how strong and committed you were. He didn't deserve that. I have never considered you a bore in bed. If I can't get an orgasm, it's 'cause of Laurie's brain control. I just transfer the orgasm to my heart then, and it's still exciting to me. I don't take it personal if you don't have an orgasm, as long as you're enjoying it and have a good time. Sex isn't just about an orgasm. We don't even have to have sex if you don't want to. I could fall asleep with just holding and caresses too. Honestly, Laurie has got some super strong brain control on me. I like the cuddling too, and caresses are awesome. David never caressed me. He made love like a robot. I just want you to feel happy and loved, Brent said. You don't have to feel like you have to have sex or orgasms if you're not in the mood or not up to it. Brent and I had some hot honeymoon time with each other celebrating our new monogamous relationship, but I wanted to do something for the guys who were on the ex-marriage list. On Valentine's Day, I got an idea. I think it would be cool if Jesus would create a special room in Church of Gail where my millennial form can make love to the men on the marriage list. It would be an enhanced sex dummy. I know during the millennium you won't have any problem with me making love to the other men at that time. Yeah, true. That's a good idea. I'll ask Jesus if he can make that happen. Oh, good. I bet if he did that, they would be happy. And if the millennial form had the ability to communicate and talk, and had my personality, and could bond with each of the men, they could have a relationship with that while we focus on each other in our current earthly forms. I was thrilled I thought of this. From what I understand, my millennial form is super hot too. A real young body with no imperfections. Brent agreed. That's what Jesus has told me. I bet the men would love it. I was excited for the men, who I knew loved having sex with me. I think I came up with a great idea, I said. For sure. I mean, it's really going to happen, so it's not all fantasy, I said, because Jesus had told us that the men on the marriage list would make love to me in my millennial form, and I don't think you'd be uncomfortable with it like you are uncomfortable with the marriage list. Yeah, that's a great compromise. It makes everyone happy. The only way I'd execute you would be if I confused the real you with a clone, I told Brent. By the way, back in the 1990s when you were calling me on the phone, I told myself that I had no problem with you wanting to kiss another woman or hug them at times. I think freedom is the way to true love. You know, like a casual friendship kiss on the lips, or a friendship hug is cool with me. I always saw you as a warm, huggy kind of guy. I admire your warmth and generosity. That's real cool of you. Friendship kisses on the lips are the best. I remember how I hated it, that my husband was so threatened by my friendship with you, and he distanced himself more from me because he was so controlling and wouldn't let me have any friendships outside of marriage with the opposite sex. A marriage partner should never try to cage their partner. True love sets you free. I've actually learned some lessons about how to be a loving wife to you as a result of being in a marriage to a controlling, abusive man. I told myself if we ever got married, I would never try to control you, but would give you the complete freedom that you gave me in our friendship in the early 1990s. A mantra I used to say to myself in the 1990s was this: if you love something, set it free. If it comes back to you, it's yours. If it doesn't, it never was. In fact, it was the freedom I felt with Brent to be totally me and adored for it that made me risk the streets to write him in the 1990s. Richard Bach apparently wrote this in his inspirational book titled Jonathan Livingston Seagull, first published in 1970. I had heard this saying somewhere, and it really resonated with me while David was a boa constrictor to me in our marriage, oblivious to my happiness and health, only obsessed with how our marriage made him appear to whatever church we attended. That's pretty cool, Brent said. You know, being in an abusive relationship like you had with Laurie has convinced you that a woman like me must be too good to be true. It has poisoned your thinking. I cried all night that you thought so low of me that you thought I'd execute you if you had an affair with another woman, especially since I have a marriage list. Anyways, I respect your feelings about the marriage list and don't want it anymore. I never really was that cool with it. When I watched you in interviews in the early 1990s, I picked up that you are a very warm person and would need the freedom to be your normal, huggy self to be comfortable and happy in a marriage relationship. And seeing you this way, thought you'd love the marriage list because it meant you could have fun and be your total self too. I could tell Laurie had a toxic effect on you and was very confused about her in your life. I never figured it out until Jesus told me in 1999 that she was a Vatican agent. That's when I offered you my hand in marriage. What people like David don't understand is when you cage your spouse, they love you less because they feel constricted. Sex is always more exciting and fulfilling when you feel completely free and accepted with your partner. That's true, Brent agreed. On February 16, 2021, Brent wrote me, Jesus officially put that room with Millennial Gail on Church of Gail. I haven't gone in there yet. I've been so shy. I see the other men coming in and out of that room, and they have the biggest smiles on their faces. I should go in there and get a peek at your millennial form. Zach and Rule 13 had a threesome with the millennial form, and 13 said Millennial Gail was gorgeous. Brent decided to visit Millennial Gail. As he entered the room where Millennial Gail was, he found himself walking into a beautiful mansion. There were wedding photos of Brent and Gail on the walls, so he took that to mean it was their mansion together in heaven. There were halos around all the furniture and objects in the room, as if everything was glowing. It was like walking into heaven. He walked upstairs to the bedroom, and Gail's millennial form was there waiting for him on this beautiful, luxurious bed. Brent was so nervous that he almost threw up, and then was so turned on that he came in his pants before he could even do anything. He just stood in the door in shock by how gorgeous Gail looked and got an erection and an orgasm within seconds. Gail's millennial form was very understanding and just held and cuddled him in bed until he was ready to go again for some lovemaking. Then he came over and over again while they made love to their favorite music. Brent was ravishing Millennial Gail like a rabid animal, but then he quieted down with music from the love album he made for Gail, his old yellow eyes back floating in the background. After things quieted down and Brent and Millennial Gail held each other for a while, Brent felt the presence of Jesus. Jesus, how is Millennial Gail so beautiful? Brent asked Jesus. I've never seen anyone or anything this beautiful in my whole life. Jesus said, yes, you have, Brent. This is Gail's true form. Gail's millennial form is composed of her inner beauty. Inner beauty is what everyone looks like in the millennium. On earth, your heart perceives it. This room allowed your eyes to perceive it, just like it will be in the millennium. Brent felt that Gail's millennial body was as hot as her soul. Everyone's true form is their millennial form, Jesus said. That's who they really are. A person with an ugly heart will look ugly in the millennium. No diet, exercise, or surgery will be able to fix it. The only way to become more beautiful would be to become more beautiful in one's heart. Brent told me later about his experience with Millennial Gail. By the way, did you change your picture? He asked me. It looks different. Which picture? Oh, you mean for Skype? Not that I know of. Oh my God, Brent said. Your videos. I see it in your videos too. I'm seeing your millennial form. It must have been my trip to that room. Seeing your true form like that must have changed the ways my earthly senses are perceiving things. Brent and the men regularly visit Millennial or future Gail. And since the day Brent entered that room on February 17, 2001, he now sees Gail always as Millennial Gail. After the Bible was canceled on Easter Sunday 2022, the men still visit that room with Millennial Gail, but instead of calling Gail's future version Millennial Gail, they call her Future Gail. Some of Gail's men, like Brent, now see current Gail as future or Millennial Gail. Since February 2021, Gail has been content with having just Brent as her lover. Though Jesus kind of reinstated the marriage list in January 2022, Gail could have been happy with only Brent. Jesus did not need to reinstate the marriage list, and Gail didn't need Jesus as her roommate. Gail is learning to stop her hoarding and to release her fear-scarcity mindset in her life, and this includes having a marriage list she no longer needs as insurance or backup. Gail is learning to relax about herself and to release her fear-scarcity mindset. When Gail was a child, her mother always threatened to throw her out on the street for improper looks or behavior. So Gail has felt her whole life that she is regarded as someone who can be easily discarded if she doesn't measure up. The man or being who makes her feel most secure and loved is Brent Spiner. And for this, he has won her eternal adoration. Around Brent, she feels she can spread out and relax in all her glory. Anyone who makes her feel constricted or unaccepted in her total person can never win her heart and can never win her sexual interest. In the meanwhile, future Gail roams about Church of Gail, and the men on the canceled marriage list visit her regularly. Brent officially moved into Gail's apartment in March 2022, and Brent and Gail are living as man and wife, even though Gail never sees him because he's in another dimension. But she feels his humps when he has sex with her, and relishes the deep connection she has with him. She has her dream man, and nothing in the universe must keep them apart.
In a world of secrets, where darkness reigns, there's a warrior rising, breaking free from the chains. She's Gail Schuler, her heart pure and strong, with the power of love, feel like the world's wrong. Yeah! She's a first, a passionate crusader. Stand by side, let's conquer it all. Through space battles and time.